Assalamu alaikum, dear students. I'm your teacher Naveed Naveed, and today I brought the Schoolboy by William Blake for you. It's a beautiful poem, and it's our lesson number 5.3 in the textbook. So let's begin with the theme or the central idea of this beautiful poem. This poem describes the feelings of children related to their school experience, specifically the experiences of very young children when they are sent to school for the first time, or the early days that they spend at their school. This poem narrates those feelings beautifully. And obviously, you must remember your own early childhood, your own early school education when you were brought to school for the first time. You must remember how hard it was for you. It's a universal phenomenon that children are reluctant to go to school. They don't want to go to school and they find it very hard, painful, oppressive to get up early in the morning and to go to school and to learn things, specifically the way we teach them. Why is it so? What are the reasons behind that? Reason number one is that, of course, freedom is a part of human nature. Man is born free and he wants to remain free. Restrictions of any kind are always resisted. We don't enjoy things when we are compelled to do them. Getting up very early in the morning and eating your breakfast when you're not feeling really hungry, and wearing a particular kind of uniform clothing and going to a place which you find very scary, and sitting in a particular room where there are so many other victims just like you, and listening to the talk of an adult who seems to have gone crazy. It's all against human nature, and it can be very, very painful. That's just one aspect of the argument, that restrictions and discipline, they are against human nature, and humans don't like compulsions and restrictions. But should we solely blame human nature for this problem, for the painful feelings of children at school, especially during their early school days? Is the fault with the children only, with the nature only? No, that's not the case. Along with describing the feelings of children and their experiences related to their early education, this poem also criticizes our school systems, our instructional techniques, and educational methodologies. We are trying to teach them our own way. Our education system, our policies, and our instructional techniques, they are not exactly according to the psychology of those children. So, on the one hand, the poet is describing the feelings of children, which are always mostly painful, and on the other hand, he is actually urging the authorities, the people who are responsible for making these policies for our schools, he is urging them to make our schools and education more comfortable and enjoyable for our children. He is suggesting to make it less painful for our children. Of course, it will not be enjoyed entirely. Uh, Learning itself is actually very, very enjoyable, provided you teach the learner the way he wants to learn, not the way you want to teach. Learning itself is not a bad thing, it's actually inevitable. You can't survive without education and without learning. The problem is with the way we are trying to impart education. Education is not simply transferring information or data from one person to another person, or from a book to the mind of a young child. Education is about personality development, it's about personality building. So, if a child spends his time in anxiety and oppression and mental stress, it has a very, very negative impact on his psychological well being and development. You cannot expect that child to have a wholesome, healthy personality, and when such a child grows up, he grows up with serious defects and shortcomings. So the poet is suggesting that we should try to eliminate or at least minimize that element of oppression in our formal education. So let's wind it up that this poem is a beautiful description of a child's feelings related to school, and at the same time it's a bitter criticism against our educational system, and it is suggesting our educationists, our policymakers, to make school education, especially for young children, as comfortable and as enjoyable as possible. Now we'll read the text of the poem and I'll explain the poem stanza by stanza for you. Here is the first stanza. I love to rise in a summer morn when the birds sing on every tree. The distant huntsman winds his horn and the skylark sings with me. Oh, what sweet company! You can see that this stanza consists of 5 lines, and a stanza consisting of 5 lines is called a quintet. This poem consists of 6 quintets. We can also see that morn and horn are rhyming. Tree, me, and company, they're also rhyming. So the rhyme scheme is A, B, A, B, B. But there are some variations in rhyme scheme in the following stanzas. We can also observe that there is some beauty of nature. Some beautiful scenes of nature have been described in the first stanza. We must remember that William Blake was a romantic poet, and beauty of nature is one of the salient features of romantic poetry and English literature. And in this first stanza, the poet is actually the narrator. Now we'll talk about the narrator, the person who is talking to us. And this poem has been written from the point of view of the child himself. So the child is talking to us and he's saying that he loves to rise in a summer morning when the birds are singing everywhere and the huntsmen, they are blowing their horns, and the songs of skylark is a bird. The child has got the pleasant and beautiful company of all these elements of nature. He likes all these things. He likes to get up early in the morning, provided he is allowed to enjoy the company of all these beauties of nature. But unfortunately, that's not the case. What happens to the child, he is going to describe that in the next stanza. But to go to school in a summer morn, oh, it drives all joy away. Under a cruel eye outworn, the little ones spend the day in sighing and dismay. Dismay is fear, and cruel eye outworn is actually the personality of the teacher. The teachers who are irritable, the teachers who are aggressive and cruel, and they keep the children silent. They use threats and punishment and they shout at them. Actually, the teacher has been painted in a negative light in this stanza because the poet is criticizing our school system and the attitude of the teachers. The most painful thing in a school for a child who is scared to go to school, is not the building, it's the teacher. Well, so the child loves to get up early in the morning if he is allowed to intermingle with nature, if he is allowed to enjoy nature. But unfortunately, he is sent to school. And going to school takes away all the happiness. It destroys his happiness. And he has to spend his day in the company of or under the supervision of a teacher who is very aggressive and cruel. And all the young children, they have to spend their day in such a miserable situation. They are sighing and they are scared. They are afraid. This is the kind of environment in some of our educational institutions is provided even today. So over here, the child is describing his fears, and the child is the mouthpiece of the poet, and the poet is actually criticizing. He has started criticizing the educational system, the environment of the schools. And then at times I drooping sit. Drooping is bending down his head, and spend many an anxious hour. Nor in my book can I take delight, nor sit in learning's bower, worn through with the dreary shower. So at times when the child is forcibly sent to school and he is made to sit in a classroom, so he bends down his head, he becomes disappointed and so grieved. And he spends such a long time, many hours, in that anxiety, in that fear. He cannot take delight in his book. The child seems to be aware of the importance of learning. He is not averse to learning, he is not against learning, but he is against that environment which actually takes away all the delight from the process of learning. And he actually does not like to sit in the shadow. Bower is a shady place of learning. Learning over here is knowledge. Learning's power is actually the shade of knowledge. A school is believed to be, it's considered to be a bower of knowledge or a shade of knowledge, shadow of knowledge, but the child does not like to sit there. And this learning's bower has been worn out through rains. It's just like a tree that has lost all its freshness and charm because of excessive rains. So, the poet is actually using a metaphor over here. He is comparing school with a shady tree, and it's such a shady tree that has been worn out through rains. Because of rains, it's no more fresh or shady. So again, uh, it's being presented in a negative light, and the poet is criticizing the school and the education system and the kind of environment that they provide. How can the bird that is born for joy sit in a cage and sing? How can a child, when fears annoy, but droop his tender wing and forget his youthful spring? Now, this stanza is a beautiful example of a metaphor. The child has been compared with a bird, and a child in school is just like a bird in a cage. And with all his innocence, the child is asking his innocent questions, that how can a bird that has been caged expected to sing beautiful melodious songs? And how can a child, when fears are so annoying, how can you expect that child to have a playful, joyous attitude or behavior? Such children, they will also have all the symptoms of disappointment or grief or suffering. And such birds that are caged, they cannot fly, they cannot enjoy flight, and they cannot sing beautiful songs. They just drop there, they just bend down their tender wings, and of course, they forget about that spring because they cannot enjoy that spring. The spring is out there, but they're not allowed to go there. They are caged. They are kept in a kind of imprisonment. They are imprisoned. So that joy of spring, that beauty, that freedom, all these things are no more available to a child in school, just like a bird in a cage. O father and mother, if buds are nipped and blossoms blown away, and if the tender plants are stripped of their joy in the springing day by sorrow and care's dismay. There is a beautiful example of alliteration in the second line of this stanza, blossoms blown away. Repetition of ba and la sounds, it creates such music and beauty in this line, and it adds a lot of rhythm to this line of poetry. By the way, there are examples of alliteration in many other lines of this poem also. I just wanted to draw your attention towards structural beauty of this poem, and just wanted to remind you that other than central idea or theme, there are other beautiful aspects, there are other important aspects from which a poem or a piece of poetry can be enjoyed. And you should approach a piece of poetry from all those different angles in order to appreciate it, in order to evaluate it fully and comprehensively and completely. In this stanza, the child is asking his father and mother, his parents, and he's asking so many questions, that if birds are crushed and if flowers that have just blossomed, if they are blown away by wind, and if plants are deprived of their youthful joy by sorrow and care and fears of different kinds. Stripped of means deprived of. And over here, it may also mean that if you take away, if you remove all the leaves from a young plant, of course, it will severely hamper its growth and development. The point the poet has started discussing in this stanza, it continues. All the ifs are in this stanza and all the thens are in the next stanza. In this stanza, the poet is saying that if this thing happens, if this thing happens, and if this thing happens, then what will be the result? That result has been discussed in the next stanza. How shall the summer arise in joy, or the summer fruits appear? Or how shall we gather what grief destroy, or bless the mellowing year when the blasts of winter appear? What the poet started saying in the previous stanza, he is completing here in this stanza. He is saying that when buds are nipped and flowers are blown away, and when plants are damaged at an early age, we cannot expect them to bear fruit at a later stage. The summer will not be joyful, and no fruits will appear on such plants. You cannot expect to gather fruit when grief has destroyed those plants at an early stage. Mellowing here means a mature age, and a plant that was crippled or damaged at an early stage of its growth, when it grows up, it does not bear any fruit because it grows up with serious deficiencies and defects. It has been damaged by blasts of winter. The poet has used a metaphor and he has compared a child with a young plant. And just like this, if a child is exposed to a brutal environment where it's not treated well and where there's a lot of oppression and anxiety and fear and aggression prevalent, such an environment damages the child, and such a child cannot grow up into a happy, healthy man. When such a child reaches his mature years, he has got all those deficiencies and defects. Such children grow up with serious psychological disorders. They've got distorted personalities, suppressed personalities, and such kind of environment and education, they're actually counterproductive. Instead of helping the children to grow and to actualize and realize their hidden potentials, their latent abilities, they contrarily crush them and suppress them. And you cannot expect such children to grow up into successful, normal people. They are unable to make any great achievements or do any mentionable thing in their life. All their creativity and productivity is gone, and they remain a kind of abnormal all their life. This is the negative side and a seriously disastrous impact of such education system where children are not treated well, where the education that's imparted is not according to the psyche of those children. That's all about this poem. We started by discussing the theme of the poem and then we discussed it stanza by stanza. And I hope that I've made it clear and everything is now clear to you. Even then, if there is any problem or question, anything, you can ask me and I'll entertain those questions. Thank you very much for being patient with me, for listening to it so far. Thank you and Allah Hafiz.